Hey, I'm Ike, and this is Draw Process. I'm going to draw a page of my comic, and I'm going to process about the techniques I'm using, my mindset, and my current development, we'll say. So here we go.
Okay, so we have Farah whistling, hopping down, Sword and Sun noticing her call, and then her running through the crowd of cows. And I actually have her showing 3 times. She hops onto a boat and then threatens the oarsman to help her transport to the fight. So that middle panel there in the middle of the page, it's open. There's no border, and there's no background above. So it's just going to be just a row of cows and Farah actually showing 3 times on the panel. It's a stylistic choice, I guess you'd say. Here, when I'm penciling, I'm trying to stay really loose, not get too bogged down in the details, just get the basic shapes correct. I'm referencing my thumbnail on my phone. Yeah, finding the horizon line and then the perspective on the building behind them. They've just left Weaver, the Weaver's house building, so I put that in the background to give a reference for where they are now. Yeah, very loose sketches of what are supposed to be cows. Trying to find the perspective on this boat. The way she jumps on it, I wanted it to look like it rocked. The boat was tipping some, kind of surprising the men on the boat. So I let that have a little tilt to it, and I'm gonna put a little wave coming off of the boat, a ripple, and then a big dynamic shot of her pointing the pointy end of her stick. So this is the spear she had in the first scene of the comic, but the cap, or the blade part of it is covered up. And so she's got the butt of it in the guy's face, which still has a sharp point to it. And yeah, big kind of dynamic shot with her kind of pointing it right at the camera. And here, trying to capture whistling. So, I just held my hand to my own lips and kind of looked at what shape feels natural here that someone would give to do this. Pulling her cloak off with the other hand, because in the next panel I just wanted the cloak waving in the wind as she left it behind. And so to prepare people for that, I wanted to show it being removed to some degree, so she grabs it. That's just for continuity, and to tie the shots together from this panel and the next. But yeah, getting that the position correct, and her face, referencing old panels of her. Finding the shadows at this point, because I got the basic shapes down of where her hands are and so on. And it still is kind of rough, but I know well enough where my shadows are going to be that I was able to just go to inks from there. Something that happened this page, I used a 2H pencil the whole time. And maybe my hand was a little heavier than usual, like I was pushing a little harder. It forced me to... there was a point where I had to stop adding layers to the pencils because it was getting too dark, too messy on the page. And there were points where I had to erase what I had penciled and then to be able to add new layers of pencils on it. That would have been easily avoidable if I had used a harder pencil, which would give me a lighter line, or a blue pencil or something, but I just like to use regular pencil, so that I can get an extra layer on there. And then the pencils would have been, it would have been faster. I wouldn't have had to erase as much, and then the inks would have been a little, clearer after having clearer pencils underneath. All right, yeah. This shot here, just a little hint of cows in the background. The angle on this camera, it's kind of looking up, so you don't see a whole lot of the cows or the people down there, but you need to get a sense that they're there, of where she's going. Yeah, because I actually did reference the last page when I'm laying where those stone blocks where they meet, where the gaps are between them. So I actually had to reference that and find those spots. That's a drawback to having specific architecture with like brick lines, like the edges of those, because it needs to be consistent to a degree. So I do prefer to be less detailed in large blocks that require symmetry. If the bricks are small enough, it's just a texture and you can just throw it in here and there. But these were so large it needed to line up in a similar manner. Okay. So, yeah. Getting out the eraser. Because my pencil was too heavy. As I'm looking at my self-draw, what I really wanted to do today was try to comment on what I was thinking as you're watching it, and what I can learn as an example to you all of how you can look at your own work. So I see what I'm trying to do and why I'm making the choices I'm making, and I can assess now if that's the best way to go about that. I see that keeping the really light and loose sketching on the panels before I go into pencil in more detail, I think that's a wise choice. It makes sure things are in the right position, and that seems pretty effective. I'm noticing that my pencils are too heavy, too dark for me, so that I'm not able to add more layers to refine details or shadows as much as I would like, as much as I could. And that, there's a solution to that. Just change the pencil. Use a harder one and then switch to the heavier one later. Yeah, here I didn't have a great plan on, was I going to have a higher horizon line where you could see the this row of cows going, see them, the ones in front of them and in front of them towards the horizon, or if I would have a lower horizon and not let you see, beyond the first row because they'd be lower on the page. And I went with a lower horizon after, erasing and playing with a few options. I wanted to be able to show her in the panel, landing, running through the crowd, and jumping over a cow. And so I positioned her on the left, middle, and right of the panel. And I knew I needed to make sure she was clear. But I also wanted to show the cow herder guys that we saw earlier there. And I needed, cows to be her to kind of be going in between them, see them in front of her and behind her. Looking at it now, I was going off of a pretty rough idea of what to do with this panel, and I was just executing it, and kind of quickly going on impulse, and it's okay, but it's not as good as it could have been. I think I can see where I would have had her start a little further to the left in the first spot. In the middle, when she's running across her, she's a little larger, physically drawn like larger than the other two figures of her. So that kind of makes it seem like she ran a little closer to the camera and then back a bit. And she's a little too close to that cow, like where her chin and her chest kind of meet the cow's butt. So that's like maybe less than ideal, but by leaving it not perfectly symmetrical and so on, there's an energy to it. There's an organic feeling to it, and I'm so I made my call to live with that. I'm interested in speed and efficiency, and so on. So. And it had certain qualities I do want to capture, the spontaneity. So I went with it, trying to work out the shadows. And so here I've got the problem of there's foreground elements, mid and background elements, and I use a monochromatic color in this comic, colors or values. So I can't use color as much to separate foreground, middle, and background. So I try to rely on use of blacks to help separate those things. So, do I, in a sense, artificially shadow the foreground elements so that she is more clear in the middle? Or do I apply more shadow to her in the midground, whereas if that's the area, that's what's in focus, and let the foreground be lighter, really, or at least have less contrast, less black elements. When I'm drawing the cows here, I pulled my phone out and I looked up some pictures of cows so that I could just quickly reference the leg shape, the body shape. At this point, I'm all for using a sketchbook to practice ahead of time the elements you're going to need so that it flows easily. But I'm getting pretty good at these quick gesture drawings from a reference. And so there's things like this that I'm very comfortable just pulling out my phone, referencing, and throwing on the page. And I didn't even have like photos of these cows in these exact positions. I'm not actually like copying what's in the photo in front of me. I'm just looking at the structure of their hips, their legs, rib cage, and so on from a couple angles. And then I'm like, oh, I can kind of see how this works. And then I throw it on the page. So yeah, I've got the same issue with the blacks here. Am I gonna? I go ahead and put shadow underneath the cows. It is more of a noonday, a lighting situation. But I've got to separate her in that foreground from the cows back there. Yeah, here I am erasing again because the pencils are too dark. Really, I couldn't make adjustments without starting over. There was no referencing on that pose. I was pretty happy with how that looked. Trying to capture that jump when her knee is there's all that foreshortening because her hip is her legs open, like her knee is towards the camera, in line with her hip, and to capture that in that foreshortening is not the easiest thing. But I was pretty happy how that turned out. Just from feeling my way to it, not really referencing. Yeah, same with, I guess, all these poses. Something I catch myself doing here. I find it easy to draw heads large. In real life, the human head is larger to the body than in some art. In some of the ideal art or superhero figures, the head is smaller. And when we draw it, it's easier to go with the larger head too, because you can capture more expression. Because you have a larger palette, a larger face to draw on. And that's what we're thinking about, is like, if we're trying to capture the emotion, then we might put more focus on the face and the head, and then without even thinking, just draw it larger for that purpose. But I've been reeling that in, that impulse in some lately. So, I guess something I see happening with my work here, being very dynamic, like this pose here. There's and all of the physicality of her movements on this page. It's very dynamic. It's very expressive in the body language. A lot of foreshortening, and there's some exaggeration for sure, but it goes with the dynamic of it. It's like, it's useful to the expressiveness of the gesture. But I like the simplicity and structured kind of figures that I draw sometimes. I do like going that direction, but then I have this impulse to be more flowing, loose gestured. I find it with drawing women instead of men, where with men I'm very comfortable with a more geometric and hard line to things and straight edges. And then if I'm drawing a female with curves or flowing hair, I want to capture something that flows more. So I have these two impulses in me, and I'm trying to marry the two. And my pencils have always been more expressive and more gesture, and then I clean them up and simplify them to ink. And so sometimes people, they just recognize the finished product, like the the more geometric or simple figures, or less dynamic in a way. But there, you can't hide the life that's in my work in the pencil phase. So if people, when people do see the pencils, they're like, "Oh, I think I understand you better now. I see where you're coming from." I want to treat that right. That's part of my DNA. It's who I am as an artist, and I want to develop that, and allow for it and not try to stifle it. So both are developing at the same time, and I'm just letting it happen. And there's some chaos and some uncertainty in that, but that's where creativity comes from. I have to let that ambiguity and tension exist to develop. And that can be uncomfortable, but I think it can be a positive if we think of it differently. And if you see like newer artists and there's that chaos in their work, it's like, that's a good thing. It's a powerful thing. And I'd hate to see them stifle it. Yeah, and now the inking, cleaning up the lines. This is where things start to look more simple and more shape-based. Even though the initial penciling has that gesture and that expressiveness. Okay. Yeah, so here with my inking, I've been noticing my lines are, I tend to move quickly. And if you move slow with a pen, you get a consistent line width, like the weight, the thickness of the line on the page is very consistent. And it might be, depending on your technique or how you feel in your, it might be straighter, or it might even be more wobbly because, you're just moving so slowly. But that's another point of tension for me, is that my lines sometimes don't quite touch when I'm closing a form, or I kind of lift the pen off the page as I move it, and the line starts to thin out and kind of disappear. And that has a connotation in a lot of people's minds, I think, of something that is rushed, unrefined, amateur. And I like artists who they have a very slow, steady line, like Mike Mignola. But they're not. But I like other kinds of artists too. I appreciate other styles there, and so sometimes I'm tempted, or I have that tension, because I want to get a more clear, solid line that's made more slowly, and just use less lines. If I want to get faster, just put less lines on the page rather than speed them up. But I kind of like the look of the fast lines and the kind of looser line that I put on things. The almost rushed quality of it, it gives it a certain I don't know, beauty, naivety, speed, joy, something good. And I like that quality. So So I do that, but I work towards both. I work towards simpler, cleaner lines, but also moving it quickly and not restricting too much on what feels right in the moment. So it might feel right to start putting more wrinkles on a face or more texture on a wall or something, or folds in a piece of clothing. And there's a part of me that's restricting myself. Don't go crazy with it. Catch myself if I feel that. But then there's part of me that just wants to draw freely, cartoon freely. So if the feeling I get from the old woman's face is that it's really wrinkly, that I just draw what I see, what I feel. I don't know. Yeah. Again, with the balancing or the tension of the two. And with the clothing that they wear, I'm allowing that to slightly change. I think most people won't notice. But as I continue to draw these people and ink them, like with her boots with the really high laces, there's, do they cross in the front like shoelaces all the way down her leg, or just every other time? And just those little details of the structure, like same with her quiver and how those things fit in there. It can change subtly, but that's partly thanks to my style being simple. If you had a really detailed rendering of it, and it looks like a different quiver each time, then I think that might cause more of a pause in people. But when it's drawn more of a gesture, as when it feels just like the idea of a quiver, then people probably can not pay so much attention to it. Yes, here the cows. It's basically just a wall of cow, a pattern of cow on the behind her. As they get smaller, there's less detail to the lines, and of course, like many artists, it's that smallest cow I drew after the practice drawing all the others that I'm like, ooh, that's a nice cow, the really small one. That just has a few lines to it. Just feels, as I kept repeating them and shrinking them down, I was thinking of like cave wall art, and just the simple line gesture that captures that cowness. It's fun. I enjoy thinking about art like in comparison to written word language. It feels like visual language, but there's no language. There's no set vocabulary. So much more free expression here. Okay, filling in the blacks. I try to go for solid chunks of black. Less of them, but more solid. In the past, I've used a lot more shadow on faces, for example, and on bodies, that I would be willing to just throw an entire figure into shadow, or like a half of a face or something. It works out okay, but I'm moving away from that to a degree because, some of these panels are more complex, and the amount of black I use at a mid, back, or foreground, position, I can't do it in isolation. If I just throw half of a face in shadow, but there's things behind it, it might throw off the sense of depth and so on. I don't know. That's just one little thing I've noticed, but getting more comfortable with throwing in chunks of black, but not entirely obfuscating some part of the body, not needing it to be fully in shadow to put it in shadow or put some black on it. Yeah, and here I only put the shadow underneath the cows. So behind the cows is another plane. It's another layer deep in the image. And even if it was in shadow, or a dark alley behind them or something, if I were to make that entirely black back there, it would really flatten the image. The shadow underneath them, the shadow on the wall, it would just start to flatten into one plane. By leaving it open behind the cows, it gives the impression of another plane of depth behind them, and that disappears because I haven't put any lines on it. It's totally out of focus. And here, putting the high contrast waves in this water, I don't do a lot with color to imply that, so I'm using the blacks to do it, and that high contrast, it brings that forward into the foreground, gives some weight to that bottom of the panel, so that the cows and back there doesn't seem like the heavier part of the image, because that's not where your focus needs to be. So that's why I added so much blacks to the water, as to kind of balance and bring the attention back forward away from the cows. All right. Yeah, you can see me finding the shadows on the leg, where I want to put them, how much of them, if I want a little outline on the leg or not. I tend to start with a little less and then add, even beyond, what my original pin lines were. And then there's little, methods I use for lines are either my 0.5 micron or a certain thickness. And there's a way that it's just a control of line width, I guess. But, I thought of that because just a minute ago on Sword's Head, I thickened his eyebrows. I wanted more weight, more black in that spot, and I just used the brush to do it. But I don't allow for complete variation of all, gradations of thickness. It's like, it's either going to be the thin line or a certain amount meatier for me to bother thickening the line. So those little controls you put on yourself allow for solutions. I mean, they allow for possibilities and development of techniques. So don't be afraid to limit yourself, whether that's what tools you use or so on. I got you here. I didn't like where I was putting shadow. I felt like it confused the foreground and background there, so I added some white out, cleaning up a few spots with white out, and we'll be done with this page. Minor stuff here, but the pen works really well. It's refillable fiber, brush head on it, so it's easy to just go in and overdo it. Really, just do waste time or take time to fix all these little things that aren't really a big deal. And there it is in color, the finished page with the words. Sometime I need to show you guys how I go about coloring these pages. It's pretty efficient, and lettering too. I can share that. It's been fun making up my own swear words. Sod of a bog. So I don't think there's going to be any cussing in this book that's a word that would make something R or PG-13. It's just words I'm making up. But I'm having fun with that. So that's this week's page. Be the practice of your art. Encourage others to do the same. That's what I'll be doing over here, and I will see you next week.